guy, a Hoosier, and a Hillbilly walk into a bunker. How's everybody doing tonight?
Doing fantastic. This is Hillbilly here. It was a great evening.
And I'm Guy Actual here for episode 3. I'm out of traffic, so life is good.
Goodness gracious, I don't envy you.
Yeah,
That traffic is horrible.
It is. It's terrible around here. With all the construction and the main exit to get out of our area to the main freeway, they literally tore it up and they didn't give us any warning. It was just surprise.
Don't you love those surprises though?
Those surprises are wonderful, and it's a great segue to what we're talking about bunkers. Because if we let people know with a bunker, we'd have no traffic.
So we were sitting around and we were talking about different bunkers and items we have seen, and I brought up Atlas Survival Shelters. Again, we are not sponsored by anybody. We are not coaxed by anybody. This is just our own ramblings, and again, none of this is legal advice. Always do your own research. We're just doing what we do.
And vote.
And vote. Absolutely vote.
Don't care who you're voting for, just vote so you don't complain later.
So Atlas Survival Shelters. I've seen their stuff, seen them around. I mean, it looks like they do a lot of really cool things, and they also do, a lot of interesting bunkers.
They do. They create a lot of wonderful things that are, if you've got an endless budget, you could buy pretty much whatever you want.
Absolutely, and they make sure that there's, they sell all the bells and whistles to go along with it, from your air filters to your water filters, the whole 9 yards, and they come out and install it and everything. So I think it's very cool. I've personally thought about, if I had an unlimited budget, what would I do? Would I have a bunker? Would I have 2 bunkers? Would I have one at my home and one in a better location? How would I build it? I mean, Hillbilly, what are some of the things you would look for if you were going to build a bunker somewhere? What would you want?
Well, that's a great question, Hoosier, because I've actually put some thought into this, and I think it really comes down to what type of post-apocalyptic, or not even post-apocalyptic, just safety from tornadoes or hurricanes are you actually looking for? For me, where I'm at in the country, I would actually be thinking about volcanic ash. I would be thinking about entertainment, hydroponics, all of that survival aspect, but also I don't want to go stir crazy. So let's say I'm actually stuck in the bunker with my family, my animals, for a year without being able to get out. I want space for everybody to have their own room and to be able to walk, and maybe take a dip in the pool.
And you, Guy?
So you bring up a great point with the pool side. Depending on where you live and the ground around you, you may not be able to set up a bunker in a lot of places due to the water table. I, too, have had a lot of experience with different bunkers. Atlas Survival Shelters, they do a great job. There's another company out there called Rising S Bunkers. And then, throughout the years, I have spoken with people about storage containers, utilizing storage containers and bunkers and modifying them. There's a lot of things that you have to really think about when you're going into it. And the water table is the main one, because if your water table is too high, you get a good rain and you're down in your bunker, you may wake up and find yourself in a swimming pool. They do a lot of work, each one of the companies out there. And if you build your own with storage containers, then you're going to have to do an excessive amount of work to try to seal the shelter as much as possible. A lot of people think that these shelters are, tight as a drum, and as much as you want them to be, the reality of installing a bunker of sufficient size that where you don't go stir crazy, it's going to have to come in on multiple trucks. It's going to have to be joined together. Typically, they are bolted, then they are sealed. They use copper or another metal gasket. I think Atlas started using those. Don't quote me on it. It was either Atlas or Rising S. They took a note basically from the International Space Station, and they used a very thin sheet of metal as the actual gasket, and then they're sealed once they've been joined together. So there's just a lot going into it. Your ground shifts at all, that gasket may not work the way that it's supposed to. And that's kind of my thought on bunkers. Me personally, unless the bunker is in my backyard or it's very, very close to me, and I mean within like 15 miles close, it's hard to say whether it's worth it for anything outside of nuclear for me.
Yeah, I mean, my whole like dream world, right? The dream world, I would have a house on top of a cave system and then use that cave system to be able to build my bunker inside of, and hope, again, in the hopes that that cave system has a underground stream of some sort that I could tap into for water and such. Again, we talked about power before. It'd be great if that stream was wide enough and deep enough to actually run a water wheel for some power. But that's kind of would be my dream scenario. You're built on top of a cave system, you can just drop down. Now, one of the cool things, I won't say who has this, but a buddy of mine has a bunker, but it's not a bunker, it's an armory that he can access from inside his house and be able to go down, and that's where he keeps all his guns and everything else, and his bug out bags and stuff like that. It's a very nice addition. He did that when he was building his house, though. So he built it underneath his house and then laid his foundation and everything and built on top of that.
Your buddy's name isn't Matt Carricker, is it?
No.
Matt Carrickers is the guy from Demolition Ranch. He actually, I think he has an Atlas shelter. He has multiples, and one of them is an armory.
Nice. Yeah, I like the I've seen a couple of these now where the kitchen island is the actual stairway down into their bunkers underneath their houses. Have you seen those? Those are pretty neat.
That's probably more the style that I would go for. If I could have the bunker underneath my house, that would be ideal.
So, that brings up a good point, because I ideally too would like it right underneath my house, but I'm also a person of paranoia. So the thought comes to mind, how am I going to keep the construction of a bunker secretive from anybody around? That's my ultimate question, is how do I keep this a secret so that in the event of something happening, I don't have people knocking at my bunker door?
Well, that's why a lot of the bunkers are built with rejection areas. The polite way of saying, go away before, I turn on the gas and fry you in my little built oven here.
Motion activated laser beams?
Sharks with laser beams.
Sharks with freaking laser beams.
But yeah, they have denial areas for some of them. Of course, the liabilities of something like that could really come into play, and depending on what it does, I may not want that underneath my house.
Exactly. And I think you'd have to put the bunker in place before the house is built.
I agree. There's a guy, so a couple of years ago, I think it was on YouTube, there was a guy in Europe, I believe it was somewhere in England. He built it illegally. He had no approval to do this from the city authorities, from the township. But what he did is, underneath his flat, he built an entire bunker. And he did it all by himself with no commercial architecture, no schematics or anything. It looked very cool, but from a zoning perspective, safety perspective, I don't know if there was a smart way to go. But besides the point, all of his neighbors knew he was doing it, and they all wanted to get in on the action in case there was a disaster.
It's a huge liability for other people to know about your secret hidey hole someplace, right? The whole point of a bunker is to find shelter and isolation. in a protected space. And simple knowledge that you have a bunker is a huge, huge issue. Now, another side of this coin is, I think you're in one of the flyover states, so you might have seen some of the old missile silos that are out there. And there are companies that are retrofitting the missile silos into collective bunkers. I'm interested to hear what you all think about that.
I am in the flyover range. I do know what you're talking about, and they're really cool. I would love one, to be quite honest. If I had a billionaire lifestyle, I would go buy one. My whole problem with those is exactly what you said, Guy Actual, which is they are communal. You're buying square footage they should be shared with other people. And just from a hillbilly aspect, I just don't like that. I don't want to share my safe place with others because I may not get along with them. I mean, you're buying the space based off of money, and with it comes security detail. I know that there are some that have bought the silos privately, but the ones that have made the news are communal with their own secret task force.
And I'll play devil's advocate onto that a little bit, Hillbilly. The ones that I've read about where there's, not anybody can buy in, right? Some of those spots, yeah, can be bought in, but they're also doing things like the families that buy in. They're looking for the doctors, the veterinarians, the school teachers to make sure, and then of course the security force and the farmers and all those kinds of things to make sure that as a community you have what you need to survive, and they're stocking them with real surgical suites and food because one of the positions are kitchen staffs, right, that they're wanting people that are chefs and so on to be in there, so it has some benefits. But then I go back to being like Hillbilly. If I don't get along with them or I don't trust them, how do we make this work, right? You get into positions where some people just aren't meant to survive. Sorry, but it's the truth.
No, it
Yeah,
is. And who's to say that the first person that gets there doesn't just lock the door? They're there with their family, boom, close the door. Everybody's supplies are already pre-staged there. That's part of the deal, as I remember. Maybe a private security force, but the actual owner of it could technically do whatever they want in that emergency scenario.
correct. And that brings up a good point about supplies. Not to get political or anything, but Y2K, COVID-19, there was a hoarding of supplies, and who's to say
Was
that that couldn't happen in a communal bunker setting? I mean, during Y2K, everybody hoarded toilet paper, and the same thing happened in COVID-19. Now, in a bunker, you kind of raised the debate: did you have toilet paper and have the storage space dedicated to that, or should you use something like a bidet or something else that's more reusable? But either way, you could get into that situation too.
Absolutely, Hillbilly. You're absolutely correct on that. And I have friends that have bidets, and they were laughing at me because I couldn't get toilet paper. So it does bring up, and you have to think about all those points when you're talking about a bunker too. What do you need? My thought was if I had a bunker underneath my house because I'm in a more urban area, I would be wanting to vent my generator smoke out through the sewer system because I don't want anybody to know where I'm at and that I'm running, a generator. So I don't want smoke coming out of my house, right, or out of the bunker. So there's those kinds of considerations when you're talking about keeping your family safe, and that's what this is all about, right? It's about making sure your family survives.
No, that's absolutely what it's about. It's self-preservation. You don't get into it really from a humanitarian aspect, it is really survival of those closest to you.
Survival of the richest when it comes to those.
Yes. Now, here in America, we have a little bit different of a situation than they do in Europe. Don't quote me on the country. For anybody out there, I might get the country wrong. If I do, please let us know. But I believe it is Switzerland or somewhere out there, or maybe Austria, that has a whole bunch of missile silos as well from World War II, a whole bunch of storage facilities that the Germans made that were turned into survival bunkers where they stored a bunch of art, safety, and all of that stuff. So they have in various parts of the world, depending on wars, you might have a little bit easier than us in America, but in America we don't have a lot of pre-built stuff from history that we can go on, except for some of the few decommissioned silos.
And here in America, we do have probably the most armed civilian population. So, that will come into effect whether we like it or not. And to be honest, if it's between somebody and my family's surviving,
Absolutely.
you know?
So let's look at some alternatives, right? So the bunker, ideally, if you have your own, if you have some land and you have a plan for once you come out of your bunker, because that's something you have to think about too. Are you prepared for when the all clear blows? Are you going to be able to sustain outside of the bunker after you've been down there for a year? There's a lot of thought that has to go into that. It's not as easy as just popping the hatch. How do you know when it's ready? So there's a lot that goes into it.
And
That
and you
brings
go ahead, Hillbilly. Sorry.
So it says that brings up a good point. Communication with the outside world. One, do you want to do? What does that look like? Are we doing Morse code? Are we doing ham radio? Are we depending on cell? What? How would you want to communicate with the outside world if you are going underground for a year or two?
Ham radio is probably going to be your best setup. With that, you would have to have some form of a retractable antenna system. Odds are, if it was left on the surface, again, depending on location and remoteness, your bunker doesn't want to be advertised. And if you have an antenna that's set up, and I don't know how many people have a ham radio set up. I actually am a ham radio operator, and antennas aren't necessarily small. They can be, but if you're talking about long distance communications over short waves, most antennas that are efficient, that have the ability to reach out with lower power, say 10 watts versus 100 watts, or let alone say 2000 watts, you have to have a way to send that out and retract it.
Or you could do something like a wire antenna and make it look like a power line.
True.
Mm.
But you were talking about how do you know when it's safe to come up. I was just going to say, just hope you don't come up and find that the oldest profession in the world is able to shift genders and offer lawn furniture as part of the deal.
Blast from the Past reference. Yes, I mean, for those of you that have never seen that movie, Blast from the Past is a great movie. It's a comic movie, but it is perfect for talking about what it would be like to live underground for decades, and really the thought that goes into it and the stir craziness that can come from it.
Absolutely, especially for your younger generation, right? They're Man, I don't know about you, but I think if I stuck my kid in even a bunker the size of my house, a little over 1,600 square feet for years with no chance to go outside, boy, we'd have some issues.
Well, they're going to get a chance to exercise, because one of the things that you're going to have to do is supply power to your bunker. And this goes back again to kind of that, not advertising yourself. You're going to have power, and wind generator, windmill, is going to someone's going to see that. And if there's nobody around and people are desperate, there's a good chance that they're going to try to usurp that generator or that windmill, if you will, or solar panel, unless you're outside to protect it. Now, if this is a nuclear scenario, of course, and there's radiation and there's all kinds of craziness, you might be a little bit safer. But the other question to that is, do you want to be the last person within a few hundred miles when you come out of that bunker again? I mean, there's so much to think about going into this. And if you really want to tie it into the realistic, and I hate to say it, the bleak points of view that come with it.
I agree with you, guy. It is going to be bleak, but it's one of those things of do you try to survive, or do you be the one standing under a nuclear bomb going, bring it on, you know, how do you want to look at that? Do you take the chance, or do you not?
Well, we're from Texas, so we're known for just pulling guns on tornadoes and saying, get off my property. So,
Well, that brings up a good point, and the reality is, if you're going to go the route of a bunker, there needs to be the real honest conversation with each person that's going to live in that bunker of the sanity check. Not everybody does good with isolation. Not everybody does good with lack of sun. I myself do not do well with sun. If I go a couple of weeks without seeing the sun, I get very brain foggy. So there needs to be a true looking self conversation of what would I actually need to survive. And if you're that person that does not do well in a isolation situation, for example, the movie that came out in the 90s, Rocket Man, there was a 24-hour test in isolation chamber, and one guy did really well, had fun, did theatrical acts in his brain, and the other guy went a little stir crazy. How are you going to react in those situations?
So do you take it more Fallout, where you have those people that you trust and that you want to potentially have conversations with from time to time, and have those bunkers to where there's that connection between them, like in Fallout, right? They had what was it, Vault 20, 21, and 22, or 21, 22, and 23, and they were trading people because hey, gene pool starts to get a little thin at some point. What do you do if you're truly planning to try and not only make it for you but for your family, right? You got to have a way to continue humanity at some point, right? So do you look for those types of people and go, hey, let's do this, or do you do the isolation route? And I know we're introverts.
oh yeah.
We don't like most
Yep.
people.
Yep.
But you're not at that point. You're not just thinking about yourself, right? You're thinking about your family, especially kids and future. What do you do there?
I mean, imagine a child that can't run for a year.
Yeah, see, you'd have to have like a stationary bike or a treadmill. And I mean, they've come a long way with a lot of that stuff, where you can put on a VR helmet and you can be running anywhere in the world, right? You can be running in the peaks of Mount Everest.
That's true. That's true. So, you were talking about supplies and stuff a moment ago, I believe, and I made a quick list of things that immediately came to mind when it comes to a bunker. Number one, food. Number two, water. Obviously, you can reverse those if you want to, water and then food. What with both of those comes waste disposal. And then we also have to look at air. You need to be able to breathe. Medical. People, regardless of where you're at, if you live in your apartment for a year, say you're agoraphobic and you don't come out, you still have to have medical. You got to have Band-Aids and Tylenol and all kinds of stuff. Or maybe something more serious like suture kits. or even, trauma bags.
Insulin.
Insulin. Oh man, if you are dependent on insulin, that right there that's almost a very different conversation. And there is, for people that don't know this, there is a project out of California. I can't remember which university they're at, but it's openinsulin.org. And they are striving very hard to basically work out an open source way for people or pharmacies or local areas to make their own insulin, which is one of the most wonderful things I've ever heard. If you can donate to anybody, I highly recommend it. They are a group of really good people trying to do something really great for a bunch of people that don't deserve to get robbed on a monthly basis.
You brought up a good point. You're kind of swaying my mind here, talking about this more to the communal aspect. The Hoosier was talking about earlier with places that have medics. I myself was very healthy, and out of nowhere, I got appendicitis, and I
Hmm.
had to have emergency surgery that night. And I'm thinking to myself, what if that happened to my wife? Would I have the necessary skills to effectively and safely remove somebody's appendix? And the answer is probably not. I mean, that would take a lot of skill, and there's a lot of risk that goes with that. So kind of making me think more along the communal line, because if heaven forbid somebody dies, what do you do? Like that, that'd be horrible.
Yeah,
Well, absolutely. And you were talking about waste disposal. I really going kind of reverse that. It's waste reusal, right?
good
Because
point.
everything has to be reused. Because at some point, it's going to you're going to need it. Whether you're converting something into a fertilizer or straining and reusing liquid waste, stuff like that. It's just and when it comes to death, how do you reuse what's there without going too crazy?
Yeah,
But is there stuff that you can reuse? But yeah, originally my thought was, yeah, I don't want anybody around, but now I'm like, man, I really probably want people around because we all have, just like in life, right? We all have our own experiences, our own abilities, and our own knowledge. And when we come together as a group, we're much better than as an individual.
100% of the time. 100%. Um,
100%. And, waste disposal, waste reusal. We were talking about this in episode 2. Methane gas is a power source. That would be twofold. Waste reusal, you use it as a power source and use it as a fertilizer. But that requires a lot of skill set and a lot of upkeep, which then, you need people from different backgrounds.
it does. It takes a very wide set of skills. Medical, you were talking about appendicitis. I mean, I couldn't tell you what the appendix looked like even after you cut somebody open. And I was a medic for 2 years. Worked on the fire department. Was a firefighter for a short period of time until some rules changed. Did the EMT route, did confined space rescue, and I'm a big guy, so the confined space rescue wasn't fun. But coming back around, the medical is such a vast field. Um, the books alone. Um,
I, and this is
this,
tying back to our very first podcast where we're talking about data archival,
yep,
right?
yep,
Having those books and having that knowledge available. That's
absolutely.
just, it comes full circle, right? But and look at some of the abilities we've lost, as a society in general. When you come out, and even maybe while you're down there, you're probably going to need people like a blacksmith to
Oh
be
yes,
able
Yeah.
to mend and fix things, welders, but
plumbers.
plumbers, all those. And some of the most important people are going to be our teachers
Yes.
and our farmers,
Yeah.
because you're going to have to generate food. I don't care how big of a facility you have, there's no way to store that I could think of to store enough food for, say, 10 people for 10 years. I mean, and eating, let me rephrase that, and eating healthily. You could probably hit the bare minimum requirements for calorie intake, but probably just barely.
So realistically, looking at this for a non-communal, vastly pre-scheduled, pre-calculated environment where we have multiple families interacting in a very large facility, realistic ability to stay in a bunker, I mean, I can't see it being over a year at the max, and that to me is just seriously pushing it.
Agreed.
Seriously.
I agreed
Um,
because we haven't. The one thing we haven't touched on is air,
correct.
and you have to have air scrubbers. We can't. I mean, at CO2 buildup, you're gonna have to scrub them. Those scrubbers don't last forever. Volcanic ash, you have to have a different type of scrubber for that. There's and then fire. We haven't even talked about fire, fire suppression, and what to do with the smoke inhalation. So it becomes a much larger scale for even just 12 months than really meets the eye.
Hey, you're just one grease fire away from becoming a mine fire, technically.
Yeah. Yeah, and if you're, I mean, if you do it for a year, you're probably, and I'm not an expert. None of us are experts here, but I'm guessing you would have to do some sort of hydroponics, some sort of. You could probably have fish tanks along with that, but all of that has opportunity for fire, and that's bad in an enclosed space.
And the best, strangely enough, and Hoosier might be able to speak about this more than I can, but one of the best ways to produce oxygen inside of a sealed environment, thinking like a submarine, is an oxygen candle. And they don't last very long. Is that correct? Hoosier, have you had experience with them before?
Sorry, no, I was a target. I was not on a submarine.
Okay.
Yeah, that was. I spent 2 days on a submarine, and that was all the 2 days I knew that I needed to know. I never wanted to be on a submarine.
But yeah, to put it in perspective, the candles, and this dates back all the way back to World War II submarines. They used the same substance, but they were about 3 or 4 feet tall. They were about 8 to 12 inches in diameter, and they had to be changed out either every 4 hours or every 8 hours, and you had to keep going. And when you burn them, it actually produces oxygen slowly and releases it into the environment, because air purifiers, air scrubbers, those filters do not last nearly as long as people think they do. If you don't believe that, you can talk to some astronauts who got stuck between here and the moon needing oxygen scrubbers.
The
I
whole
mean,
Apollo 13 incident.
Correct.
to create oxygen in an enclosed space, if you don't have electricity, it becomes 100 times harder,
Oh yeah.
right? But if you have electricity, I mean, you can do, and you have a good supply of, say, running water.
hmm
You could
Electrolysis.
you could do electrolysis, but they've even found ways to use magnets to
Mm,
separate the oxygen from water. But again, it costs a lot of electricity.
correct.
So, you know, um,
And just
and
so people know, modern submarines use electrolysis to produce both fresh water as well as sorry, not, to produce hydrogen and oxygen.
um, but yeah, and then plants, as Hillbilly was saying, plants are going to be huge in that ability to do that. So, You would hope, like, I saw one of the missile silo bunkers where the whole bottom level was nothing but a forest with a stream running through it. The stream was from their tank wells, but they had trees actually growing in there. And then, but then again, you still have to have the electricity for the lighting to be able to make the trees grow or the plants grow and all that.
And I guess that brings up that takes me back to the biosphere, that the experiment in the desert that I did is bugs. Like, okay, so we're talking about creating an underground contained forest or any type of hydroponic thing. We know that bugs add a lot of benefits to the plants. Is there Would there be a benefit to introducing bugs into that atmosphere? And if so, how do you control them? As there would be no apex predator to control their populations.
You start introducing any species to an area, if it doesn't have something to control its population, that population is going to get out of control, right? So yeah, I think that's a very big example of something that you would have to, because most plants need some sort of bugs or worms or something
Spiders.
along
Yep.
that line, spiders, to be able to take care of that stuff. One of my thoughts always, they ask, well, what would you take down? Would you take pigs? Would you take this? Would you take that? If you had a place in your bunker, there would be two animals that I would consider taking down: chickens, because they can always make more, right? And rabbits, because of the high. But then again, you start getting into that bloodline thing, right? It's not just humans that have an issue once you breed within the bloodline too many times, right?
See, this goes back to my thoughts all the time about the bunkers. Is it really effective? Because not only with that, if you bring down a animal that you did not properly test or could not account for, what if it developed mange? What if it spontaneously developed mange because of that bloodline? Then all of a sudden you have an infected blood source, you have an infected food source. And we've already found that mange can affect humans in a very negative way. And that's just
Indeed.
one disease.
That's why I'm really hesitant to say I would bring chickens down, because man, you have to be on it, and you can't really bring down a bunch of medicine for your animals. I mean, you'd have to bring down some, but you'd want to go back to looking for those natural things that produce what they need to keep them from getting sick. And you'd have to go back to looking at those types of items and going, okay, what do I need to grow? What do I need the the space for? Like moss. There are mosses out there that are awesome at converting, CO2s and nitrogen oxides and all that into breathable oxygen. And there are also several mosses that are edible. The main things that I would be looking at for a source of food would be mushrooms. But mushrooms do take, from at least what I know, a lot of considerable water, moisture.
Yes. Yes, they do.
So, again, you're starting to take a major resource, a potentially limited resource. What about instead of a bunker, what about an island?
See, and
Mm.
and I was actually about to toss out the question of what does it cost? What would it cost to buy into a communal bunker that was fully set? Million? Million five? Maybe two? Realistically?
I would bet it would depend on the size of your family.
True, I would agree. But let's say it's you, a wife, and one child. I would think a million would be the
Uh,
minimum.
I would bet it's more than that. I would bet now again, you're talking about depends on the luxury, right?
Of course, that's
Because
we're
maybe
saying
the
bare minimum, not a lot of
bare minimum
luxury. Yeah,
where you have
not just you,
basically, let's just
communities.
say Well, let's just say, but you're buying 200 square feet
Okay.
in this bunker. I would say it's probably going to cost you $50,000
Oh, that seems
per.
really low. I'm talking about with supplies, the
I
whole
would
9 yards.
say it's 100, but I'm talking about a small communal bunker. If you're talking like an abandoned missile silo,
Yes.
I would say it's probably going to run you 2.5 to 3 million.
Okay. So, hypothetical. With that price range, guaranteeing comfort, guaranteeing the start of the supplies, not all of the supplies. And I know which way I would go. Would you rather spend that on the bunker side of things, or would you rather spend that on a piece of property and a group of friends?
Oh, absolutely, a group of friends. I mean, if I could have the people that I trust, because you have to trust everybody, right? The people that you trust, and sometimes what happens is you trust one half of the couple, but not the other.
That's true.
You start looking at that, but if you're saying if I could have an area,
A compound.
a compound with the people that I truly trust, family, friends, that style of truly trust, I would absolutely want the compound, right? I mean, just because
What
it's
about you,
great.
Hillbilly?
Go
So,
ahead.
you took me down a path. My creativity got away from me. So one of my most favorite Leonardo DiCaprio movies is The Beat. And, for those of you that have seen it, you'll understand why. But basically, I've been sitting here Googling buying islands. And I mean, it's a little pricey, a few $1 million. I mean, it's definitely out of my price range. But if I had the money, I would probably do a remote island with a enclosed community that would involve a doctor, a vet, and a whole bunch of other things, and it would be completely secluded and self-contained. However, to Hoosier's point, I mean, yeah, you trust one half. I mean, like in the beef, it worked for a number of years till you got the wrong people that told too many people, and then it all fell apart. So, you could have a Lord of the Flies situation with that if anybody's ever read that book. But I would go, I'm leaning more towards property, whether it's an island. I'm picking an island just because it would be, completely remote and secluded. But if you could find land in the wilderness, if I could find land in the wilderness, that's what I would do, definitely, versus the bunker. Which is different than what I was thinking at the beginning of this episode.
And I agree with Hillbilly. At the beginning of this episode, I was like, I just want my family, boom, boom. And then we started talking and we started discussing things and this and that. I'm leaning more towards Hillbilly with the island thing because if you're remote enough, you might be able to stay out of a blast area or even a virus outbreak if you're remote enough to where you maybe only have to go in the bunker for 3 months, right?
Yep.
And then you come back up and you start checking on your animals, you start getting things back in order, and hopefully, but also with the islands, you've got fishing, hopefully, as long as the fish aren't infected, but you've got land to be able to grow stuff on. There's probably already natural stuff there. Hey, I may not like coconut, but you know what? If it's what I got to eat, it's what I got to eat, right? But hopefully you also have a small seed vault that you can try and do things like mushrooms and other stuff that should grow fairly well.
And the only downside I could think of about the island, and it's a true downside, is salt water. If you don't have a fresh water supply, you have to have some way to do the desalination, which that is very expensive and requires a lot of upkeep.
So, in my life, I had the privilege, and I'll call it a privilege, to spend 2 years on an island in Hawaii. And one thing I realized about 6 months into it is that if something tragic happened, there is not going to be enough for everyone on that island. Resupply, there's nothing coming in, right? There's no lumber, there's no nails, there's no toilet paper, there's no cars, no fuel. I mean, you think Gilligan's Island had it bad. You stick 1 million people onto an island and then cut off all supply routes to it, it's going to break down real quick. And if you haven't read Lord of the Flies, shame on you. Go read it. Seriously, it's something everybody should read. If you don't know the story of Piggy, then you need to go read that. An island, it almost terrifies me. Yes, the isolation's great, but the isolation is something that is a huge danger.
It is a danger, and you would have to have a good amount of supplies for what you needed.
Mm-hmm.
But pretty much what you have built is what you have,
Correct.
you know? And you can't take up the whole island with buildings and because you got to have spaces to grow farm stuff. But that goes back to Hillbilly's statement too of making sure you have the right folks. You have the blacksmith, the carpenter, the mechanic. A diesel mechanic would absolutely be a necessity. You'd probably also want to have some people that know how to truly sail because if worse comes to worse, you start putting ships together and sail away. One of my favorite movies as a very little kid was Swiss
Swiss
Family
Family
Robinson.
Robinson. Yep,
Yeah.
so good.
And they did a lot with a little, but they were also a very small group. You'd want a decent sized group, but not too big. And then, there would be certain things that you'd have to keep track of. Who had a kid with who? What family line does that run down? Because they can't be too close, right? If you're living there for generations.
Correct.
And there'd be all sorts of new rules that you'd all have to come up with. And, it's great to say, oh, yeah, we'd all kumbaya and everybody'd agree. That ain't happening. No matter how good of friends you are, I mean, we all disagree on things all the time, right?
Of course.
Of course.
And, and now imagine we're stuck on an island together and we're having to make decisions based on what we feel is best for our families. We're going to be very protective of that. And, you get two sides that are very opposed, you're going to have issues.
Very
So,
quickly. And again, limited space. If you can afford an island, odds are that you can afford to put a lot of preparations and thought into it, such as runways, such as desalination operations. There's a lot of cost that's going to come with that. And if you're going big for the island, I don't know if you could do it in 3 million, maybe. If it actually has a natural water source, I might be interested in finding that, just because. But me, I'm looking for a compound with 12-foot fence with another 8-foot fence and barbed wire tucked in between the fence lines, and 25 of my closest friends that have been vetted, all working together with a very specific set of tasks and jobs and skills that can play into the community. That would be
Well,
my ideal.
okay. So let's talk about this. So, I know for me, an island would be a pipe dream. I mean, that's never going to happen in my. I'll never make enough money for that. But, North America would, if you're looking at buying a compound in the wilderness in a desolate area, of which, let's face it, in America, it is becoming very hard to find desolate areas. Would you, if you're on the North American continent, would you stay in the American geographical region, the lower 48 plus Alaska, or would you go up to more desolate but worrisome of permafrost in Canada, where the population is more spread out and there's huge areas without a lot of people, but you would have probably more resources at your disposal: animals, trees, forests, all of that.
I don't know. You said Alaska, and there's some parts in Alaska that are really great
They
6 months out of the year, but then they get really freaking cold and really, really snowy. So you'd have to adjust to that. But then again, I wouldn't live too far south where there's no rain because, hey, I'm going to have to grow crops. But I don't want to live too far north where it's going to snow and freeze out all my crops. Looking at that is a very difficult. I would say no matter where I was, I'd want at a minimum a decent sized lake for use of the compound. If I couldn't get that, I'd want a good stream that was flowing. I think lakes, I think streams, I think Lake of the Ozarks in Missouri, an interesting place. But again, you've got the snow. You know,
Climate's a huge factor. The mountain men, the frontier men did it. The whole Mormon Trail and all of that, they did it, but there was a lot of lost lives because that
and
severe harshness.
and
And
let's be honest. Let's be honest. Most of us cannot compare ourselves to them because
no,
they were roughing it. My idea of roughing it now is having a cabin without two TVs. All right, I'm I'm older now. That sleeping on the ground is not, you know, it's not the sleeping on the ground. It's trying to get up the next day that would be, painful for me.
Yes, I,
right.
I can't do I can't. I'll fully admit it. I'm a hotel. I gotta have an actual bed.
You know,
If I'm even in a cot, I'm not moving the next day. My bones are completely seized up.
there are places inside of the U.S. that I feel would be a good area that you can still get land at a semi decent price. I actually, and I'm not saying where this is because somebody else will swoop in and scoop it up in a heartbeat, but 23 acres, roughly $500,000, already had a well on it, 2/3 already cleared of trees with electricity at it. Now, its location is at a pretty ambient area, give or take a couple of months, right? Summers are hot, just period. There's a reason why a lot of the states were very sparsely populated before the introduction of air conditioning. You get out into some of the desert areas of Arizona, especially down in the south. Could you survive in that type of temperature on a daily basis with very sporadic water? Probably not. Could you do it in Mississippi? Probably so.
Yeah, it's all about the location, right? You'd have to decide and then go, okay, this is what we're doing. Now, here's some of my thoughts, and I will be totally honest. Um, some of my thoughts are I'd want to be close enough so that I could, take my crew and go into a larger store and totally clear it out. Stuff hits the fan. We've got box trucks ready to go, and we go in and we clear out everything. I definitely want to have a place nearby where I could grab guns and ammo. I'll be honest. But beyond that, bows and arrows.
Yes.
Crossbows would be preferable just simply because, hey, I need a better aiming ability. Um, but being able to grab those types of things, and I wouldn't, I play a lot of apocalyptic games where you're surviving, for some reason or another, mostly zombies, right? Because it's very popular in video games. When I go into a house to loot, to gather stuff, not only am I taking everything, I'm busting up the furniture to get the wood. I'm tearing up the mattresses to get the springs and the stuffing, because you never know what's going to come in handy, right?
Very true.
In those situations. But yeah, I would want to be able to go and what is it that one of the famous YouTubers, I call them famous, out there says the word stands for? Oh my goodness.
Oh,
The
to
fat electrician.
to strategically relocate.
Yeah. What is it? To strategically transfer equipment to alternate locations. That's what it is. Shout out to Fat Electrician. Love your stuff. Love your show. If you haven't listened to him, absolutely go watch his stuff. My favorite is still Proportional. That
That's a good one. I think
is.
mine is Sergeant Reckless is my favorite.
So I have something here that we have not touched on that, given society, it might be in the popular area that might actually be something that maybe our viewers haven't thought of. I know I haven't thought of it until just now, which is talking about bunkers or even a private island or a compound. Um, Alcohol, tobacco,
Mhm.
mind-altering substances. Is that something that could be allowed, whether it's for medicinal or for recreational, or is that something that could just cause too many problems in a situation?
I think that it would actually more so need to be a requirement for the production of ethanol for multiple reasons. It can be utilized as a fuel. It's great as a solvent, whether it's degreasing or thinning of other products for the cleaning of wounds. You can clean wounds with it at its highest percentages. Can you drink it? Sure, just not to excess. I mean, in any scenario that it's possible to truly try to establish prohibition, well, wars and fights have been waged over that. Well, maybe not wars.
So moonshine is a part of me. I totally understand where you're coming from with that. It's a more of the how do you control the addictive side of somebody that could potentially be, inebriated, albeit accidental, and misusing resources.
Whether
I
it's
think it would be more like what we had in the military. So, like in the military, you got so many days underway in the Navy without a port stop. They would do what we called a beer float, right? You'd go out, you'd get 2 beers, and you couldn't drink them on the ship, so they took you out in one of the ribs and they drove you around while you drank your 2 beers, and then you came back. That's what you got for. I think something similar to that, where you could have 2 beers, basically 2 beers every, once a week, or maybe, once every 3 days or something like that. It would just come down to number one, if you asked me, I wouldn't care. As long as you're not drunk, I'm to the point of I don't care. But you're now putting my family in danger if you get drunk. So yes, I want limitations on it.
of course.
As long as someone wasn't asking for something silly like a bottle of whiskey a day, you know, I would I'd probably be fairly open, but the moment you abuse it, you lose it.
If if in a post apocalypse, if you can produce a bottle of whiskey per day, I'd be highly impressed. That would be amazing. And you would have a
Depends on
bar.
how many depends how many stills you allowed me to have.
Well, how many stills could you operate supply line? But more so,
Yeah.
I have always looked at alcohol as a barter necessity than anything else.
And it depends on the crops that you have to really be able to truly decide what you can make, right?
This is
You
true.
know, are you growing potatoes? Are you growing corn? What crops do you have to be able to turn? Do you have sugar at all? You want to talk about something that I think would be sugar and salt. Those are
Mm.
two things you would absolutely need
Of course.
post-apocalyptic.
And I think that might be a good show for us to cover our bare necessities. What does it take for a human being to survive a year? What are those necessities? Um, I'd love to have that conversation with you all.
Absolutely.
Sounds like a future conversation.
I think so
But
too.
Yeah.
looking at the time, folks,
It is. And today was more of a serious podcast. It wasn't as lighthearted as our previous two. Thank you for hanging in with us. Serious conversations here today. Serious thoughts that we're trying to give and look at it from different perspectives. I'm sure many of our listeners, if you're still listening at this point, God bless you. Thank you for sticking with us. But I'm sure that at this point, if you're still listening, you probably had similar thoughts and conversations. So,
let us know what you think.
yeah,
Please, we want to hear back from you all. Let us know what you're thinking. Let us know, your thoughts. Future conversations for us. What you thought about what we said. Yes, we're probably full of, but
I know
That
I am.
Absolutely.
So, signing off from Hoosier. Have a good night, y'all.
I'm not from Hillbilly. Have a great night and a great life, everybody.
Amen, everybody.